Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with TBA Rabbinic Intern, Rachel Cohn.
What we'll be looking at tonight is a section of the text where we find Moshe in a predicament that perhaps many of us can relate to, of multitasking to the max, being very overwhelmed and stretched and stressed in his capacity to handle everything as a leader. Namely, the situation where he was ruling over a bunch of different cases that people would bring to him to act as judge. And this is a precursor to the system of the judges that was established. And thankfully, Moshe got some very good mentorship from Yitro in this section. This is, again, before the receiving of the Ten Commandments. And I happen to view this section as part of Moshe's sort of leadership preparation for him to be ready for the moment for everybody to receive the Ten Commandments. So that's some of why it interests me, but we'll take a look at it, unpack a little bit more about what might have been happening behind the scenes for Moshe as a leader and how he might have grown from this incident and this mentor relationship from Yitro. So beginning in chapter 18, verse 14, I'll read aloud a little bit and then I'll invite discussion for most of the time. So we see Moses' father-in-law, who we know as Yitro, saw how much Moses had to do for the people, and he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you act alone while all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" Moses replied, "It is because the people come to me to inquire of God. I decide between one person and another, and I make known the laws and teachings of God." So he gets some pushback, and that's Moshe stating plain and simply, no, Yitro, you don't understand. This is just how the situation is. There's all these people. They come to me. I teach them the laws of God. So Yitro, I think, knowing his audience well, gives him the following response. "You will surely wear yourself out, and these people as well. For the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone." And then I didn't include this part on the sheet, but Yitro proceeds to give him a bunch of advice about how to set up a system of judges so that he does not have to act alone himself, and carefully choosing wise people from the population to assist him in this task. So then this is the part where I think Yitro knew he must have had enough of a relationship with Moshe to know this might have hit home. So if you do this, and then the translation, I'll look at the Hebrew in a moment because the translation is a bit tricky, but we could say, if you do this and God commands you, or when God commands you later, you will be able to stand. All these people too will go home unwearied. Or another translation is, all of these people will come to their place in peace. So their place could be getting home after standing in line waiting for a judgment from Moshe, or it could be the people collectively getting to the promised land. But either way, it seems like Yitro is saying minimally something about God's commandedness being tied to the urgency of this task of delegating, and it being something that will benefit not only Moshe, but the people as well. So I'm curious for your thoughts. When Yitro says, "You will wear yourself out and these people as well," what might Yitro be referring to if Moshe continues to be the only person acting as a judge? Why would it wear out the people and not only Moshe? It's obvious to me why it would wear out Moshe, but why would it wear out the people as well?
Justice delayed is justice denied.
Yep. Yeah. So, right. If they're waiting long enough, well, say more about what that means to you.
No, I mean, if you're so burdened and the people are bringing the problems to you and you can only do so much, then their problems won't be addressed and they won't get justice.
Right. Great. Bacharach, you had a thought also?
I had another shot with the dog in the background, but the other thing is that it's like the virus right now, the pandemic stuff, people are waiting in line and can't get results. There's a major amount of frustration. Forget about there's nothing happening. It's not even denied. It's not even denied, just denied. It's just that there's just such waiting and frustration because they can't talk to him. from that standpoint.
Right.
And
the waiting.
Anxiety, right.
Yeah, right. The kind of that stasis builds frustration, anxiety. He could give the best ruling in the world once they get to the end of the line. But if they have to wait so long that they've built up frustration about, whatever the issue is probably continuing while they're waiting also. So it's like, whatever his expertise is diminished by the fact that they have to wait. Great. Any other thoughts before we, Larry?
Yes, he's not going to give the best decisions because he's overburdened.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether you want to open it up now, but I just mentioned every morning when we read passage rabbinic texts, as Marshall instructs us to do when he is doing Pesukei de Zimra, in the Slim Shalom, there's a page of text about truth. And the last of the 4 texts there is from Shabbatot, page 10, Amud Aleph. And I won't read the whole thing, but it's about Rav Chisda and Rabbi Huna, who sat in court the whole day, and then Rabbi Chia bar Rav Difta told them that, and it quotes verse 13, the people stood about Moses from morning until evening. And he says, do you really think that Moses sat in court the entire day? He says, when will he have time to study Torah? From that I understand he doesn't mean literally studying Torah. When will he have time to prepare himself for the decisions that he's making? Mm-hmm. And then it goes on from there.
Very nice. Nice connection. Right. That he needs to refresh his own ability to think clearly, and that's going to be diminished. I have a lot of friends who are doctors, and they've said residency is terrible for that kind of thing because, you're supposed to be learning to be a doctor, but they put you through these super stressful conditions where, they don't feel like they can be the best doctor possible because they have no sleep. So, right. So Moshe might be in a situation like that. Great. Any other thoughts before we look more at Moshe as behind the scenes? Okay. So I mentioned that I think Yitro knew his audience and he was saying this because he when he links it to commandedness, that's probably a thing that Moshe pays attention to. So what we're going to look at in some of the commentaries is what's behind that commandedness and why might it be part of God's wishes for Moshe to delegate. I mean, I think all of the things you mentioned are already part of, God would wish Moshe to be a successful leader. And you've all named many reasons why he can be more successful by delegating. So, but is there somebody who has the sheet who can read the Chizkuni piece, the under what was standing in Moshe's way?
I'll do it. It says, God's statutes and God's teachings. Moses refers to the statutes and teachings that God had already taught him prior to the revelation at Mount Sinai.
Great. So this maybe provides some insight into why Moshe felt really only he could do it, because there was this revelation that we read about in this prior chapter in Exodus, where it's unclear who exactly got the teachings. So in this Chizkuni, he's probably reading it as only Moshe got this information about these statutes that came before the 10 Commandments, which we know at least a large segment of the people, how we read whether the women were there or not is debated. But once we get to the 10 Commandments, it's a large chunk of the people who get the commandments. But what Moshe is saying here, according to Chizkuni, is, I have to be the one to teach them God's statutes and teachings because I have this body of knowledge that is unique to me. Nobody else knows it. Do you buy this as a response, a justification in response?
I don't know if I buy it, but I will say this, is that it's one of the dangers of having all the knowledge in one person. It does you no good to have a system of judges if they aren't taught the law. So in some respect, if Yitro wants to have a delegation of responsibility, you have to make sure that the knowledge that the lead person has is properly delegated to these other people, or the people suffer from the unqualified judges.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think that some of this goes against one strand of work culture in America that says, make yourself, essential to the organization, make yourself not replaceable. Gary, you have something to add? Or Marlise?
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously you could think of Moses teaching, appointing judges and teaching them then, but at some point Moses isn't going to be able to work anymore and he's going to die. So it makes sense that he's going to need to transmit this to other people to carry on God's commandments.
Great. So that connects to my next question, which was going to be, what do you think Moshe is so afraid of as he's maybe saying, no, this is my knowledge. It's mine. I'm the only one who has it. So you kind of, maybe you mentioned that eventually he's going to die. So that, that could be one of the fears, the things he's pushing back against is his own mortality and the limitations of the lifespan of him being the leader of the people. But I don't know, you can add more thoughts to that before we jump to other people.
Yeah, I guess that sounds like that could be a reason. Yeah, I don't. Okay,
great. Anyone else want to say, do you think there are other things Moshe is afraid of in wanting to hold on to everything? Larry?
Yeah, well, not intending to be too critical of Moshe, I think that his story is a cautionary tale about someone who has the power, and for reasons that we justify in our tradition, he's in some senses unwilling to actually to share it and to pass it along. It kind of reminds me of a story that I once heard from Jerry Rawlings, who was the president of Ghana in the 1990s, I think 80s and 90s, and he said that when he took over, actually in our revolution, and then he was elected president, he had a lot of things he knew he needed to get done. And then when his first term was up, he knew he had to run again because there was unfinished business. And then when that second term was up, he said, well, there's nobody else around, so I'm going to have to do it again. But then he stopped himself and he said, well, if I don't step aside, no one's ever going to step in. And the world is full, especially Africa, but the world is full of examples of leaders who may, not because they want to acquire power, because they think there's nobody else that can do it. But as my friend Bitzala Bechor used to tell me in Israel, a common Israeli expression, the cemetery is filled with indispensable people.
Right. I'm thinking now of if anyone's seen Hamilton, the musical, the part where George Washington is saying to Alexander Hamilton, we have to teach them how to say goodbye because the vision will live on. If I let go of this, then the vision can live on past me in a way that, if people view themselves as indispensable until the end of their lives, then in some ways it limits the extent to which they can pass on that vision and let it grow.
Maybe there's a Torah in an alternative universe where Moses steps aside much earlier.
That's a midrash waiting to happen, right?
There's no Jewish people without the bringing up and providing knowledge to those below you. Corporate America works like this all the time. I've been a lawyer for 33 years. Most law firms don't survive their founders. And it's precisely because of this problem, is that they don't actually bring up the mid-level people to actually assume the role of responsibility. So when they die, the law firm dies with them. And I'm just saying that it's sad to watch, happens every day. And it's the big test for the law profession. Can the firm survive its founders? And the ones that do are the ones that teach the people that are below them how to assume the role of responsibility in the business of the firm and all the details and all of that. I've seen it so many times over my 33 years. It's just amazing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's a world I know very little about, and it's interesting to hear about. I think that there's probably in many fields a tendency for ego or just human nature in general to get the best of us and make us feel strong when we are holding everything. But I think Yitro is pointing out something really important here that actually you're not strongest when you're holding everything in your one portfolio, let's say, and there's a strength in sharing it. So let's look now at part of Yitro's wisdom in trying to convey this to Moshe, specifically in using the word, like either God commands you now or when God commands you in the future, this is going to be necessary. So is there somebody who can read the Or HaChaim? Larry
Sure.
wrote. Oh, wait, I think the other Larry had raised his hand, right? I couldn't.
Yeah, I can read it.
Okay,
it's fine.
great.
Perhaps Yitro was afraid of Moses, arguing that after all was said and done, he would forfeit the opportunity to perform the commandments, including teaching the people God's ways, and that it was not the way of the righteous to look for ways to ease their burdens, even if they would tire from shouldering them.
Great, thank you for reading that for us. So it sounds like Yitro is anticipating some of Moshe's pushback here and saying, Moses is a guy who's really worried about fulfilling God's commandments. Moshe might think that actually he needs to fulfill all of the commandments by continuing to hold the Torah and teach it to people kind of, one at a time in solving these cases. And that he might think it's actually part of God's command to him as leader to be the one who's holding all of that Torah in his, in his basket. But so what is, what do you think Yitro is trying to offer instead? What do you think Yitro is trying to tell him instead?
It's Yitro's own way of assuring that Moses fulfills his task.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if the task is so burdensome and it's too much from one man, he'll shirk from the responsibility. And so what Yitro recognizes is that cannot happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to prevent that is to spread the burden out.
Right. And it sounds like that's actually, you're going to be closer to fulfilling God's command if you do this thing. That maybe you were viewing it as it was your job to hold on to it, but actually it's your job to spread it out, to let it go. That's why I titled this sheet setting Torah free. It sounds like Yitro is telling him that actually it's part of your commanded job here to set the Torah free, to not be the only person holding on to it. Yes, maybe God gave you part of it just to you, but it wasn't meant to stay there. And it's your task to set it free and to give it to others. So I wanted to close with this one line from Midrash Bamidbar Rabbah that it's used in many contexts, but I think it's important to mention here. The line that says there are 70 faces to the Torah. So I take this line to mean really that there are many more than 70 faces to the Torah, that actually each of us in our own faces and being reflects one piece of the Torah that is not there unless we are there to speak it and live it. And maybe an additional thing that Moshe was worried about was that transition from being, Moshe, the face of Torah, to allowing Torah to be reflected in the faces of so many more people. We know that they're about to get the 10 Commandments, and which was not a simple task. And Moshe faced his own other leadership challenges when the people, they botched something that he I'm sure is also afraid of it not going as well. That if I have all the Torah, I will know what's right and I will know what's wrong and I will do it perfectly. But part of that leap that he has to take is not only in sharing it, but also as the Torah goes to, all of these 70 faces of Torah, that sometimes people are going to make mistakes and need to patch things up. And part of the learning of Torah is how to rebuild when that happens too. So I think much of this episode that Yitro has helped lead Moshe through here is part of his preparation to get ready to let the Torah become very expansive when it's given to the Am and not just to him, and to set up the system of judges as one transitional way of starting to let that Torah become bigger than him and become a legacy and not only his own teachings. So I hope that whatever it is we are holding on to and wanting to become part of our own legacies, we find the joy and the courage to help set it free and let it go, and let it not only be something for us, but something for those we care about and the rest of the world to really enjoy. So any other quick thoughts before we go to Mariv? All right, so we will.
One comment.
Oh yeah, sure, go for it.
Sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, when you're talking about reasons that Moses could be hesitant, I mean, maybe he liked feeling special, being, the one prophet. Yet, I think we can also see that it really doesn't diminish him to share the knowledge. He may have felt that it does, but he's, the singular, person that he is. So.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.